Right then, let there be no doubt, Tuesday's Scottish budget is going to be tough. That narrative has been well trailed. The estimated shortfall between what the Scottish Government wants to do and the money it has at its disposal, the cash with which it can do that stuff, the shortfall is about £1.5 billion. That is a big gap. So let's have a look at some of the options available to the Finance Secretary. She could choose to raise taxes to plug some of that gap, or she could look at making cuts, or perhaps she will do a bit of both. So let's have a look at some of those options. Tax hikes. Well, anyone earning over £28,000 in Scotland already pays more tax than they would if they lived elsewhere in the UK. So adding to that burden could be tricky politically. There are suggestions of a new tax band for people who earn more than 75 grand, but the Fraser-Valander Institute say that would only deliver about £40 million. Yes, not to be sniffed at, but a tiny fraction of the £1.5 billion, remember, that the government wants to find. So, could we see cuts then? And where might they fall? Well, we Scots enjoy a lot of free stuff we wouldn't get if we lived elsewhere in the UK. Prescriptions, for example, bus travel for the old and now for the young too. And totemically, no tuition fees. That stuff is not means tested. Everybody gets it. Lovely, nice when the economy is rosy, but very expensive when it's not. Next up, jobs. The Finance Secretary told this programme just a few weeks back there will be public sector job losses coming. So how many might there be and where might they fall and how many, if any, might be compulsory? We'll try and find out. Then there's the council tax freeze. It, you'll remember, was announced out of the blue by Humza Yousaf at the SNP's conference a couple of months ago, seemingly without telling some cabinet colleagues, certainly without counselling the councils. That's going to cost at least £300 million, we're told. Will that still stay? We'll try and find out. Let's not forget the Greens in all of this too, of course, the other party of government here in Scotland. They scorn the very thing that everyone else seems to see as the solution, large-scale economic growth. So, is there a tension there? Anyway, enough speculation. Let's try to get some answers, because I am pleased to say joining me in the studio is the person with the answers, Shona Robeson, Deputy First Minister and Finance Secretary. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thank you very much indeed for being here with us. I want to get into all of that stuff in just a second. Firstly, though, I should ask you this. Viewers watching us on the television, many of them will have just seen Laura Kuenssberg interviewing Michelle Mone. We're going to hear a lot about that interview. The headline, effectively, seems to be the fact that she is now admitting that she could, probably will, benefit financially from a company that she had previously said she had no links to. What do you make of that?
Well, I thought it was quite an astonishing interview and quite a revelation and quite an admission. I think, though, there are not just questions for Michelle Mone, but I think there are questions for UK government ministers, what they knew when, and I think we need to hear from them absolute clarity of everything that was known, all of the interactions, what was said, what was promised, what was known. I think we need to have all of that laid out in front of the public.
She said she lied to protect her family. Not the first time we've heard that. Is it ever reasonable to lie to protect your family?
Well, look, I think people will be astonished at the quantum that we're talking about here. £60 million is an eye-watering figure that will, given that so many people are facing poverty at the moment, struggling at Christmas, and to hear that figure is just quite an astonishing revelation.
Right, you lead me on then to the budget. People are struggling at the moment. Times are hard. They are about to get harder. We think there's no secret. You've made no secret of the fact this is going to be difficult. A hard budget on Tuesday, a big, proper, grown-up budget with tough decisions. I'm sure you're not going to tell us exactly what's in it, but hopefully we can have a meaningful conversation around it. You've been doing the figures. How hard's it been? How painful is it going to be?
So let me say two things. Firstly, if you look back over the last 2 years, and I set some of this out in May to Parliament, part of the problem we have is that our budget, and indeed all the devolved administration's budgets, haven't been inflation-proofed. So that has essentially reduced the Scottish Government's spending power by about £1 billion. But of course, we've still had to pay for pay deals that have been led by inflation, and all the costs across the public services have gone up, but our budget has not. So the starting point is that £1 billion has made that even more difficult. And then if you add in the autumn statement as well, where it is an autumn statement, a budget that has very little for public services, then all of that is compounded. And that means tough choices for us.
Right, so loads to get into just from that one answer. I mean, you say you had to pay for public sector pay deals. You didn't have to. You chose how much you were going to have to pay.
To avoid industrial action strikes, which cost public services money, that is what we had to do in order to prevent that.
Yeah, but for example, the 6.5% you give to nurses is going to cost some other public sector workers their jobs. That's a shorthand, but it's probably the way it works out, isn't it?
Well, let me just pause on Agenda for Change, because that is another issue that has arisen from the autumn statement. So money for Agenda for Change pay was received about £200 million for 23-24, but no Agenda for Change pay for 24-25. Now, I don't know about you, but people don't just get paid for 1 year. They get paid on an ongoing basis. So immediately we have to find about £250 million just to plug that gap in the NHS before we look at any increases for the NHS or any funding elsewhere. So I can't stress enough how difficult the autumn statement has made what was already quite a challenging position. 10.8 million for the NHS in 24-25. That's about 5 hours of capacity in our NHS in Scotland.
Your opponents are already saying, you know, these are excuses coming in early, blame Westminster for everything, that's your tactic. Actually, you've been in power for a long time, you could have grown the economy, you could have done more with the powers you have to protect yourself. Anyway, that's what they would say if they were here. They're not. There is some extra money that has come from Westminster, quite a lot that's come in the form of consequentials from that autumn statement. One area where they've got quite a lot of money is this phenomenon of fiscal drag, that's what the economists call it. Basically, they're getting a lot more money in tax because people are getting pay rises because of inflation and the tax brackets aren't going up, so people are finding, yeah, they're getting paid more, but they're paying more tax. The Treasury's got about £14 billion out of that. How much have you got to play with from fiscal drag?
Well, the income tax position has improved, and part of that is down to fiscal drag. But can I just clarify the point you made about consequentials? Because the consequentials for next year amount to about 320 million, but most of that is for business tax cuts, not for funding of public services. That is the problem. And every independent analysis, whether it's IFS or the OBR or others, have said this is a budget that prioritises tax cuts over public investment, and that is I
want to get into business tax cuts in a second, though, but I did ask you, how much have you got as a consequence of fiscal drag?
Well, I'll set that out on Tuesday in terms of the tax that has come in over the period of time. All of that information will be set out. But yes, income tax receipts have improved. And actually, if you look at the data from HMRC, that continues to be the case. But the pressures on our budget are considerable when you consider that the money for public services is tiny for next year. So we have those difficult decisions to make. The decisions we've made on tax previously, we estimate have raised about £1 billion that wouldn't have been there had we followed UK government tax policy. So that money is important. But of course, we have to take other steps in order to make sure we balance our budget.
So you get an extra billion than you would have if you just followed UK government policy?
Our estimates are that by those decisions, we have raised around £1 billion extra for public services.
OK. Your opponents and some independent analysts and economists accuse you of a lack of transparency. They say that actually in situations like this, you try and massage figures through, you're not clear, you bury things. I mean, one example of this, right, that you wrote a letter in the middle of November, or more than a month ago, to the Finance Committee of the Scottish Parliament. And in it, in an annex at the end of it, lo and behold, there was this line about £30 million worth of cuts to frontline mental health services. That wasn't really announced in any other way. You'll say, yeah, well, it was there, it's in plain sight. But your opponents say that's you massaging it through. It's a lack of clarity. You're trying to get it under the radar. Are you going to be on Tuesday absolutely, specifically, precisely clear how many jobs, where they might go, and lay out the pain in detail to people? So
first of all, I don't accept the characterisation of the letter to the Finance Committee. What I was setting out was actually a very difficult decision of about £630 million worth of reductions in budgets that we've had to take in year because of the inflation point that I made to you earlier. These are not things we would want to do.
But it's an example that your opponents use to illustrate what they say is a broader failing, just a lack of transparency.
Well, I don't accept that. I think we've been absolutely transparent on the difficult decisions we've had to make.
And you will be on Tuesday.
So what I'll set out on Tuesday is obviously our tax position, our spend position, what will be allocated where. In terms of the point about the public sector, it's very important that in setting out the fact that the public sector sector will have to change in terms of its size and shape, that we do that with the unions and our staff side and taking that forward. I'm not going to arbitrarily announce a figure that will worry people. We will do that in partnership, and we'll maintain our no compulsory redundancy policy, which is important.
So there won't be compulsory redundancies coming?
We want to avoid any compulsory redundancies.
People working in the public sector, watching or listening to this this morning, will know that if they don't want to leave their jobs are safe. That's a guarantee, is it?
We absolutely want to maintain no compulsory redundancy. That is an important principle here.
It's not a guarantee. You can want to do something but not be able to do it.
Well, we believe we can make the changes to the public sector that have to be made on the basis of doing that in partnership with the unions. Now, we'll do that and set out the detail of how we will do that over a period of time to make sure that we have workforce controls so that some areas of the public sector will continue to have to grow, but many other areas will not. And we'll do that in a managed, proper way that doesn't worry people and doesn't put jobs at risk, but it does mean that the shape and size will change over time, and we will work with our public bodies and the civil service.
So if you can't get job losses through voluntary or wastage, there may be compulsories, but you're doing everything you can to avoid that. That's
I'm confident we can absolutely avoid
that. All right, let's look into some of the specific detail. The council tax freeze, that came out of the blue at the very end, a kind of rabbit out the hat at the end of the First Minister's party conference speech. Some senior figures in your party said they weren't consulted on that. You're the Finance Secretary and his deputy. Presumably you were in the room punching the figures into the calculator with him, were you? Well,
we discussed the policy, and the important bit about my budget is that, unlike the UK Tory government budget, I want to set a balanced budget that recognises first and foremost the needs of public services.
Is the council tax freeze staying?
But also recognises, I'll come on to that, but also recognises the needs of household budgets and, of course, support for business. So unlike Jeremy Hunt, who had £27 billion of fiscal headroom, he completely ignored the needs of public services. I won't do that. But recognising household incomes and the pressure on household incomes, that is why the council tax freeze is so important.
So it's staying?
It is staying, absolutely. Now,
how much is it going to cost?
Well, I'll set that out on Tuesday in the budget.
300 to 400 million, says the Fraser of Allender. Is that a figure you recognise?
Well, we will be working with local government in terms of what is a fair analysis of what a council tax freeze will be based on, looking at what the actual cost.
Funding to me.
Well, it will be fully funded.
What does that mean?
Well, what it means is that we will work with local government in terms of making sure that the way that it's implemented, I will put a figure out on Tuesday, but I'm not going to give you that today, if that's okay. No, I won't do that. But it'll be based on the actual needs in terms of council tax freeze.
Are councils not entitled to expect that when they hear this will be fully funded, it means that all of the councils would get all of the money that they would have received if they'd put council tax up by an amount at which they chose to?
So I think if you were a council that was going to set a council tax freeze of 3%, and you're looking at another council...
Let's look at Orkney, 10%, or was it Shetland, I think?
So I think most councils would say that actually the fairest thing is to look across the board rather than only paying each council.
Well, that's not full. If you're a council that was going to raise it by 10%, you're not getting full funding there.
Well, I think when you look at what the actual predictions were for council tax increases, then we will take a fair, fully funded approach that is fair to local government.
You're going to be accused of breaking your promises there, aren't you?
No, I don't think so. I think we'll take a fair approach that will fully fund the council tax freeze, and we'll work with local government on other things. So, for example, one of the other elements that local government asked for was flexibility and the removal of ring fencing. We will be able to give a significant amount of money that is not ring fenced, so this will be for local government in terms of removing those controls, and that will help with their budget as well going forward.
Aren't you treating councils in exactly the same way that you accuse Westminster of treating you, disrespecting them, treading on their toes, cutting their chances of raising revenue?
No, we've actually given councils revenue-raising opportunities through things like the council tax on second homes, and we're keen to give local authorities more revenue-raising powers, and that's something we'll work through the Verity House Agreement and the fiscal framework to do.
Income tax. Lots of talk. Presumably not discouraged by people who work around you, that there's going to be a new tax bracket between 75 grand and 125 grand. If you earn that much money, you're going to pay more tax. Is that coming?
Well, I'm not going to confirm anything on tax until I stand up to give my statement on Tuesday to Parliament. That'll be where I set out.
You're not denying it, though?
Well, I'm not going to confirm speculation.
Okay.
What I will do is set out on Tuesday what those plans are. What I would say is, as I said it to you earlier, the decisions that we have made previously have been based on those with the broadest shoulders paying a bit more, and the social contract, of course, means that for that additional tax that some people pay, they get free tuition, free prescriptions, better childcare.
See, the social contract is, right, that if you pay a bit more, we all get, if the rich pay a bit more, we all get better services. The reality of what's coming down the line now is most people are paying a bit more, at least half the country are paying more, and the services are worse because that's just the hole we're in at the moment.
Well, I don't accept that, and of course the
things are worse than they used to be.
The Scottish Fiscal Commission will set out in terms of who pays what in terms of the tax position overall, and we base our analysis on their estimates that will also be coming forward on Tuesday. But I think people in Scotland will recognise that if they lived elsewhere, they would not get access to a better childcare system. They would not get access to free tuition. They wouldn't, for example, get Scottish child payment if they're on a lower income. All of these things are really, really important.
See, universality, that kind of lack of means testing, everybody gets all this free stuff. Is that really the way forward now? You know, paying millionaire pensioners a winter fuel payment, irrespective of whether they need it. Isn't it time now for means testing? Here's a figure that I was reading, right? Universal free prescriptions. That costs £1.5 billion, which coincidentally is the black hole. Now, nobody's saying everybody should pay and that solves your problem, but what people might argue is maybe the richest should pay for prescriptions, for their bus pass, for their winter fuel, for all that stuff, because they can afford it.
So there is a balance to be struck between those services that are universal and those that are targeted. So Scottish Child Payment is targeted for all the good reasons that we understand. So there is a balance to be struck, but the social contract is important. You take prescriptions, and I could speak all day about this because I was on the committee at the time when this was being looked at in detail. And the issue there is that if you were to set up a means-tested system, by the time you set up that system in bureaucracy, actually that in itself would cost a lot of money and then would be disproportionate.
That's what everybody's always said, but surely with the tech available, whatever, with all the clever gadgetry we've got nowadays, you can put everybody in a bracket, say from A to F, and you stay in that based on wealth and income, and that works out who pays and who gets stuff for free.
Well, I think
too simplistic.
Prescription charges, of course, when you look at the evidence of the people who, at the time when prescriptions were not free, and they had a number of prescriptions that they had to have for their condition, the evidence was that people were choosing not to take all of their prescriptions, and that has an impact on their health.
Right.
I don't want to go back to those days, so I think it's important that as part of the health service, people can expect to keep that.
I'm kicking myself because I've got through a fraction of what I wanted to. I must just ask you at the end of this, though, about business, because you were talking about that at the start. Humza Yousaf, when he came in, promised very early on he was going to reset the relationship with business. Is this going to be a pro-business budget?
Well, let me say, first of all, we have worked very hard with business, and we've been working with them on not just on the financial aspects, but things, of course, around regulation, early sight of any new policies that might be coming forward that might impact. What I can say is the biggest ask of business has been to freeze the poundage, and we have done that for 5 years in a row, which has saved, I think, businesses about £780 million through those reliefs. So we are supporting business.
Are you going to continue to do that?
The small business bonus scheme is one of the most generous in the UK.
Sure, that's excessive. Are you going to pass on? So the UK
country.
government has frozen business rates. Small businesses south of the border say that's a massive difference. You've been given the money that you need to do that here in Scotland. Are you going to do that?
Well, I'll set out, as I said earlier, my tax proposition and proposals, the budget on Tuesday, which will include all of these things.
We'll find out on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Here's another bigger question. Everybody, long-term, apart from taxing and cutting, the one solution long-term that everybody seems to agree with, the Tories say it, Labour say it, the CBI say it, Humza Yousaf says it, is economic growth. The only people who don't subscribe to that point of view are your partners in government, the Scottish Greens. Is that problematic at a time like this?
No.
Being in cahoots with a party who don't agree that economic growth the way forward?
So economic growth is important, and of course some of the key sectors for that growth are in renewables, are in green energy, and making sure that we have the opportunities going forward to make sure Scotland continues to be a leading nation in the world. So we're not rolling back on our net zero commitments, unlike the UK government. We're sending out a very strong message to the rest of the world that Scotland is open for business, and we want people to come and invest here.
Right.
And if you look at foreign inward investment, Scotland performs the best outside of London and South East.
If you're on a big salary, you're going to earn less if you come here than you would if you worked in England.
Well, I'll set out my tax proposition on Tuesday, but Scotland is a very attractive place. We still have net in-migration from the rest of the UK because people see that coming here, they get benefits across the board in so many respects, and it's a good place to live and work, and we see that through the figures.
All right. Well, listen, on that optimistic note, we will leave it, and we will hear much more from you on Tuesday and presumably have time to question you about that afterwards. Shona Robertson, thank you so much for being with us in the studio here.
Thank you very much.